There you go. Hey, my Legion, how y'all doing today? I know my one friend, Mike Cree's been doing like Gorehound Sundays and stuff like that about gory films. If you watch the channel, and I hope you do, and please subscribe and everything like that, of course. Me and my buddy John, we review a lot of horror films, and a lot of them are gory horror films. Not every one, but a lot of them are. And we review other movies too. Um, and I thought it'd be interesting to do a very movie about my very first gore film that I ever seen. Now, I was born at a different time, late 60s, right? And we just had, for the longest time, we just had regular antenna television, right? However, we get Canadian stations. And even in the late 70s and early 80s, that's what we had. We did not have cable because we were in the country and the cable didn't come out the country back then. They go all over now, but back then in the 80s, they did not. And, we were just subject to regular cable until VHS came about, videotapes. And anyone remembers some of my videos, growing up, my mother said, "You're not allowed to watch this. You're not allowed to watch this." Especially horror films and stuff like that. It's like, why? Because I said so. Because she was always very controlling, right? And my dad had something against gory movies. I like movies. I don't like to get gory. I don't like to want to get gory. I remember seeing commercials whenever the first one I really heard about. I mean, I didn't really, they started to advertise whenever Halloween came about and became a big hit. You start to see a lot of commercials for slasher films. They weren't called slasher films back then. I mean, if you remember, Siskel and Ebert back in 1980 did a thing of women in danger, right? Movies. And they called them thrillers. They didn't have the term slasher at the time. And like I said, still, I mean, that's my only exposure to them was Siskel and Ebert Dogs a Week and stuff like that. But, with the success of Halloween, you start seeing commercials like this in regular hours where I could watch when I was a kid. I remember commercials for "Don't Answer the Phone," the Boogeyman would always take off Halloween, but it wasn't. It was like that was like a ghost or something like that, or like Friday the 13th commercial for that. And then whenever Dawn of the Dead came out, I remember the commercial for the very first gore film. The commercial for the very first gore film I saw. This commercial, not the first gore film, was Lucio Fulci's Zombie. I remember seeing that during Barney Miller of all things, and it had the big warning on it. And you'll see because a lot of times these gore films would have a warning on it, like this, like the one here. Then you'll see the one for Night of the Zombies, which is now known as Hell of the Living Dead. Right? There was two different warnings, right? And so I mean, pretty much it was just what was on TV, and I wasn't allowed to watch horror films, right? I remember seeing like on Canadian TV they had like a thing for The Fog, and they were showing uncut in the commercial. The Fog were like those the ghost pirates. I haven't seen a movie in a long time killing someone. That was the scene, showing gore during the commercial, which was kind of neat. But my very first, we used to have, I used to have one allowed to watch horror films, but then, my grandmother used to have like a Saturday afternoon thing where Superhost would host it, of horror films and stuff, horror and sci-fi, mainly from like the 30s up to like the 70s, right? And then we had a local horror fest come about called Late Great Horror Show. And then the Just Right for Late Night Horror Show, which was just like a week retread of that after the show got canceled, right? And it was, and occasionally it would show some gore during that. But I mean, my mother said, I don't want him watching other movies. And my dad said, I'll be there watching them with him. But she was just so controlling because my dad said that. My dad said, your mother hated my guts. She took out on your kids. And she was really a cruel person. She still is. And anyways, I would see a little bit of bloodshed in some of those. Like Dementia 13 was a black and white movie. No, I mean Francis Ford Coppola's first directing debut, I think. And they would show us it was in black and white. They had like cuff heads and stuff like that. The way they made the black and white look real grimy, it looked like it was more gruesome than it probably really was, right? But it looked gruesome for the time, late night TV, at least when I was little. Well, I mean, I was in middle school. I wasn't little. or like there was a little bit of gore in the Terror, but I mean it wasn't. It was just like regular stuff that would be shown on TV. Now, my very first gore film introduction into Italian splatter, right, was Alien Contamination. The video used the I have the thing from the newspaper print. I blew it up. Now there's the one from Night of the Zombies. The other one is said like now this is the one you usually would see. This film contains scenes which make you consider shocking. No one under 17 will be admitted. The other one a little bit different. It said like they warned people about all the messed up stuff that happened in the movie for alien contamination. Now I first saw alien contamination on Elvira. Now I consider it to be the first gore film I really saw. And this is before we had a VCR and stuff like that. Well, I eventually saw a whole bunch of them. And it was like evolving, like it was like a ripoff of Alien, right? And what happened was like they get these eggs and they explode. If you get like the acid that was on there, you would eventually explode from the inside. And they shied. I mean, it was still on a virus, still cut out. They still shied away from showing everything. They couldn't show everything, but they showed a lot of bloodshed. And my dad said, "This is too gory for me. I'm not watching this." I watched the whole thing. I loved it. It had a great score from Goblin, and that got me really into the score from Goblin, my favorite score that they did for Alien Contamination, which ironically was reused in Night of the Zombies, which is now known as Hell of the Living Dead. Alien Contamination is now known as Contamination. But some of those titles I didn't like. I like the original titles better. But I mean, Hell of the Living Dead's better than Night of the Zombies. Alien Contamination, I always call Alien Contamination. Now, like Dr. Butcher MD is called Zombie Holocaust, even though it's not really about zombies, it's about cannibals and the doctor. So I still consider Dr. Butcher MD, or like Make Them Die Slowly was Cannibal for Rocks. And I still like Make Them Die Slowly better. Well, anyways, I digress, but Alien Contamination was the very first gore film I saw and was my gateway into the Italian splatter scene, which would later be like Dario Argento with his Giallo films, and some of his other films are pretty, or like Terror at the Opera, or Lucio Fulci, who did Zombie, like I mentioned. I mean, that was the very first gore commercial for a gore movie I seen. And then they would have, like, I remember seeing, like, they'd have commercials for, like, Gates of Hell and stuff like that. I mean, but they showed it, and they had the warning on there, too. Another film that Fulci did. But I mean, Alien Contamination was my very first gore film on a virus, but they showed a lot of bloodshed on there. Sometimes they shied away somewhat for some of it stuff, but they showed a lot of bloodshed in that one, and it was cool. I mean, it's a great movie if you ever get a chance to see it. But I mean, back then they'd have a lot of warnings on these movies like this. I remember they had warnings on like Dawn of the Dead, oh, well, Zombie, Gates of Hell. I think of some other ones. One Tenement. They had the scenes from that on there. They had Day of the Dead, of course. Day of the Dead was actually really gory. Um, Mother's Day had well, I said Dawn of the Dead, Mother's Day, and there were some other ones I can't remember off the top of my head. But I mean, you get the idea. But Alien Contamination was the very first gore film I ever saw, and it's a great movie if you get a chance to see it. And I saw a cleaned up version of it on some channel. I can't remember the name of it though, but they showed it uncut. I mean, they had Zombie on there. I watched Zombie, but they had the topless part. They cut that out like bastards. They showed everything else in there. But I remember renting a lot of gore films when I got a VCR. My parents didn't. My parents had no knowledge of horror films. Hope you like the video. Bye. Till next time, please take care, my legion.